Okay, all right. Thank you. All right, let me just kind of explain who I am. I'm Scott Guthrie. I live in Portland, Oregon now, but I'm originally from Ohio. I came across the book around 1985, 86, and
Hi. We can't hear Scott. Everyone should mute themselves and shut their video off. I think we could do.
I was muted.
Okay.
I think I heard electrical surge, and then all of a sudden I became muted. So, can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you now.
If anybody can just mute themselves, that would be great, except for Scott, please. Thanks so much.
All right, so I came across the books originally from Ohio. There's a person who did an internship, a professional internship in my office for 6 months around 1986. I was just a young guy, and I was kind of starting to search, and this woman, I asked her, we started talking about spiritual stuff, and I asked her what books she read, and she said, well, I read these white, yellow, and green books, and that's all she said. And it drove me nuts. So I used to go to this bookstore and walk down the aisles and just kind of feel things out. And sure enough, the Seventh Ray, the white book that Werner and Annette Schroeder put out, AMTF, fell on the floor in front of me, and I picked it up, and I knew instantly, because I had been reading Theosophy, I knew instantly what the Seventh Ray was, at least the connection to it. And I read that, and I knew instantly that this was it. It was clear and concise and to the point, and there were no veils or anything. So I got together with her, and she knew from my face, that something had happened. So I told her, and she invited me over, and she showed me the white books and the green books and the yellow books, the Law of Life books. And she said, hey, the author of the Law of Life is in Colorado now, and she welcomes students to come out for classes. So I instantly got a hold of Alice and found out when a class was, and she would hold these classes that were maybe a week long, 4 or 5 days, or sometimes a week, whatever students could do. And she would open up her house, and then we would stay in a small hotel nearby, but she would open up her house, and we would be there pretty much all day, and we would be decreeing and talking. And anyways, that's how I got to know Alice. And then in 90, I really became involved in like 87, 88. And then from 88 to 90, I was heavily involved in helping Alice in any way I could. I was going out there all the time to Colorado from Ohio, which is about a 30-hour drive. And I would typically drive it and then, take a week off from work because I could. And I would, a week or two, I'd hang out with Alice. And then I decided, I got the prompting to move there. So I moved there in 90. And then Alice made her transition, made her ascension in 94, in I think late January of 94. But let me just kind of go over the beginning. So if you can go back one slide. Yeah, before joining the activity. I just want to kind of get you some history, because I have some interesting stories about Alice before she got into the IM activity. So she was born on April 10th, 1905. She would never tell anybody her birth date. And eventually there were some of us that were living out in Colorado helping her. And we eventually came across this date, and we asked her, and she just kind of smiled, and she said, you found it. So April 10th, 1905, she had Swiss parents. She was outside of Oregon, in Salem, Oregon. She had all sisters, but she was the only one that worked in the field with her father. And she was so proud of that, the fact that, her father, had such a great work ethic that her father saw that and took her out in the fields, and she did a man's work. She had questions about Christianity and Jesus as a young girl. And she said, what I remember is she was sitting there on Christmas Eve, I believe. The Christmas tree was up. And Can you hear me? Okay. And anyways, she had questions about Jesus and Christianity, and just didn't think that what was out there about it was correct. And Jesus appeared to her, but did not say anything. But there was a connection, you know, there was kind of communication there without talking. And his presence was, she saw him in the room. And she kind of went on. One of her things she was proud about, she obtained a job during the Depression as a 10-key punch operator. She had said all these people were in the room to get interviewed, and she didn't have a lot of experience with this, but she was able to get this job, and it was so difficult to get a job during the Depression. So she got that job. She read Unveiled Mysteries. Somehow she read Unveiled Mysteries, and somebody gave it to her, like sitting down at the kitchen table, and she found out about it, and she started reading it, and she instantly knew that was it. She decided right away to basically stop what she was doing and go help the Ballards. She found out about the Ballards. She found out that they were starting to caravan around the country as a group and have these meetings and decree sessions and all of it. And she got involved with that early on. Probably, I'm guessing, late 1935. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so the activity, the IM activity, was all about the caravanning with the Ballards. The Ballards would go all around the country and have these meetings, building this momentum of this work coming in. And Alice was right there. She was there every day, and she just would make it work. She didn't have a lot of money, but she figured out ways to eat what she had to eat, and that was about it. And she was able to stay with people, and anyways, she was helping out. She became this person that after the meeting with the Ballards, she would take notes during the activity, during the meetings, during these live events. She would take great notes, and she'd take notes on aspects of the law to kind of decipher it on her own time, to understand it better. And not a lot of people did. They heard what Mr. Ballard was saying, but she really got into the work. She became the secretary later on, meaning that she would just kind of keep track and organize things, which is so much Alice. She never wanted to be in the forefront. She always wanted to be behind the scenes. She always would say, hey, I don't want to be the big shot. They went out once to see a movie. She had never seen a movie before. And her first and only movie that she saw in a movie theater was The Wizard of Oz when it came out. And all these people went out and they were looking for seats. And it just so happens that she sat next to Mr. Ballard during the movie. And he nudged her during the scene where it is the Emerald City. And he said, that's very, very similar to the Temple of Truth. And but that's one story that she would tell about Mr. Ballard during that time. Again, she was always behind the scenes. But again, the Alice way was, and this is very much Dwa Kul, she would get and understand the organizational structure of things. And that's why she became the secretary, because Dwa Kul, her twin, is known for knowing all the different masters and what their aspects are, what they're good at, everything. So she was kind of, because she's his twin, that was very similar in a way to what his aspect was or is. She helped write the basic fundamental basic fundamentals in the I am activity, if you don't know, there, she saw a need for people coming into the I am activity with the green books that didn't have a good base structure on what all this meant, right? And how it all kind of worked together and what the basic ideas were. And she saw a need for creating, lessons that would assist people to have a better understanding of the basic idea of the I am activity and this new teaching. So she helped create those. She really, I think, created those herself pretty much. So she got those going. The master, she said, did not want us, the US, the United States, to get involved in World War II. They were trying to keep us out of World War II. And she definitely made that point. She said that when Mr. Ballard, he gained his ascension in 1936, but he waited until 1939 to kind of keep the organization, keep the activity going. There was a lot of discord at the end. There were a couple individuals that, if you read the Law of Life books, she mentions, there were a couple individuals that were trying to gain access into the leadership group of the I am activity to basically break it up from the inside. And these individuals had a connection with Saint Germain, but it had a lot of discord, a lot of past karma. And he was giving them an opportunity to alleviate that and transmute that. And they chose, again, not to do that. So that's kind of why Mr. Ballard took his ascension, I think, when he did. He just said he gained his ascension, he had enough, and it was time to go. But when Mr. Ballard did ascend, he took on a lot of discord, Alice believed, of energy trying to keep United States out of World War II. Now that wasn't successful, but she believed that certain things happened just before he made his ascension, where he took on, his body took on a lot of this stuff. And she thinks it was that's what he chose to do. Okay, next slide. So this is after Mr. Ballard ascended, the I am activity kept going on, basically from the 1940s to the 1950s. Alice was involved there, and this is a point that most students maybe don't get. There have been 2 accredited messengers by the masters. The accreditation part is, look, the masters, they can only do things that are cohesive with the law of life, right? The certain laws. And the law of balance, the law of economy, it comes into play in how they use their energy. So they're not whimsical about who they choose to be an ascended master messenger, right? It doesn't mean that people don't get messages from the masters, but it means that there's an accreditation process on the inner and the outer that goes on, basically initiations, that goes on to become an accredited messenger of the masters. Alice believed, as I do, there were only 2, okay? Mr. Ballard and Geraldine Innocente from the bridge, okay? Now, it doesn't mean that when Mr. Ballard made his ascension, that Mrs. Ballard did anything wrong. She tried her best to keep the activity going. And what happens is the people want new information. They want new things. And it's not that it's wrong. It's just that it's kind of a human way to do things. So, but they did keep the activity going. They kept the decree groups, which were so important, going. Alice at the time knew that there might be something new later on. But at the time, there was really no place to go. So she stayed with Mrs. Ballard. She was tried and true there every day, helping out in every way she could. And then what happened was there was a meeting, and Alice was involved in the meeting. Now, again, Alice wrote the basic fundamentals. And what happened was there was a meeting about getting students to demanding that students do the basic fundamentals twice a year, no matter what. And Alice was like, well, wait a minute, you have these people that already know the basic fundamentals. They're in decreeing. Why should we waste that time together when we can be decreeing rather than enforce these educated advanced students to keep taking these basic fundamental classes? And she was not heard. And the decision was made to make the IM activity kind of secretive. You had to be a card-carrying member, and you could only get a card if you did the basic fundamentals twice a year. And what happened with the books was you could only get the books through them. And the idea was the masters wanted this material open to everybody who desired it. And that stopped. So it was the card-carrying twice a year fundamental idea and the stoppage of the books in general that really halted the IM activity from an inner standpoint. The masters had to kind of, step away. And Alice kind of felt that. And she felt when that meeting, when the meeting was held about the fundamentals, she saw from Mrs. Ballard the energy come from the solar plexus, which is not the higher chakras. And she saw that energy, and she knew that that was not the correct thing. But that's what was decided to do. So once that happened, they were just kind of biding their time. And she was trying to figure out what to do, but there was nothing. But they were still decreeing. Don't get me wrong, they were still decreeing, and that's wonderful. But the idea of the IM activity being this open resource for people who desired this information was gone, pretty much. Okay, so the rumors, there were rumors about a new messenger or messages, and I think that was about 1948. But they were very close about it, because if Mrs. Ballard found out, there could be a lot of, she was not happy about that. So the masters contacted certain students about, and they contacted students that they had a past relationship with, they had a strong connection to. And they did this kind of secretively. You'd get a letter and it would talk to you and tell you about the idea of a new messenger, a new activity, and why, the reasoning for that. And I believe Alice got one. I don't think I ever saw that letter, but I believe she did get one of those. But she kind of knew. She was close with Mrs. Ike and Mary Minetta and even Geraldine, and things were being said a little bit, but on a very quiet. So she, and if reading AMTF stuff, I believe it's in there, the masters sent letters to Mrs. Ballard multiple times trying to convince her that, look, there's the reasoning for this new activity, that it's nothing against her and what has happened, but there's a change. And they've been able to get a dispensation of energy, El Moria was, to start this new activity. Okay, so she in no way went for that. She did not believe it. Mrs. Ike, who I just adore, I've never met Mrs. Ike, but for some reason, I just am fascinated with her, and I'll talk about that later on. She had this Philadelphia group in Philadelphia of the IM activity, really the strongest group. It was the decree group of all the decree groups in the I Am activity, right? And you have to understand, Mrs. Iki, she ran a tight ship, but she was very, very powerful and such a good group leader, right? And if you were in the Philadelphia group, it was 100% or nothing. And it was, you got in there and you got to work, right? And Mrs. Ballard showed up one day unannounced, walked in while they were having a decree group and meeting, walked in unannounced and announced that, look, you have to make your decision now. You're either with me or you're excommunicated. And I think pretty much everybody went with the bridge that were there. They already kind of knew about the bridge from Mrs. Iki and the rumors. And I think people at that time had started to figure out that it was Geraldine Innocente was getting messages that were set up from El Moria. But she walked in unannounced, said this statement, and people had to make decisions. And then what happened was, when you had an I Am activity, a sanctuary, it's the I Am activity that owns it. And what happened was, Mrs. Iki had built up this wonderful, beautiful sanctuary of all these incredible pieces that she had gotten from, I think, from around the world. And it was just amazing to hear Alice talk about it. It was like a once in a lifetime. It was almost like you were going to a real temple on the inner. You know, things were just there for a reason. And she had really taken the time to make this thing beautiful. And all the energy of all the decrees, and, you know, you'd walk in and you'd feel that vibration. Well, Mrs. Ballard came in and locked the doors, and I think she got rid of everything. And Mrs. Iki was so upset, and the masters said to her, look, there's a, you know, because of the etheric record, we have an etheric record of all of this. Don't worry. These are just things, but we have an etheric record, and they will all come about, you know, later on, eventually. So that kind of eased her pain, but it was a very bad time. And there was a lot of, you know, excommunication going on with these advanced members. These are members that have been in the activity for years, and they made up the base core of the I Am activity, and she excommunicated them, right? So they left. It was known then that Geraldine was the new messenger. The reasoning for it, if you go into the Law of Life, they do a really good job of why the bridge and what the certain responsibilities of the bridge, getting things out and doing things a certain way. The lawoflife.com site at the front of it has a really good explanation of what the reasoning was for the bridge. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so the bridge is happening at some point, I think in 1948. Before the bridge, Alice joined Mrs. Iki's sanctuary, excuse me, in Philadelphia. And again, that was the decree group. That was the sanctuary of the I Am. So that was taken away from the I Am and became the main sanctuary for the bridge. And it was called the 100% group, in the fact that, you know, they got together, they didn't really miss. There were probably only 10 or 12, maybe at the tops, 15 people in that sanctuary group. But, you know, again, when they got together, and they were very strong decreers led by Mrs. Iki. Now, if you don't know history, I'll go into the history of Mrs. Iki. Mrs. Iki, some of her past embodiments was Helena Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky from Theosophy times. She had many different embodiments. She was also an archangel who fell. There were 2 archangels that fell. She was an archangel that decided to take embodiment to assist mankind. And then Mother Mary was an archangel, or is, archangel, that decided to embody. So that's the term fall. Anyways, she was very powerful. Most people don't know, though, at one time, and I don't think it was from her last embodiment, it might have been, she had the most karma to clean up than anybody in the world. So that she was given a great opportunity by being involved in the I am activity and the bridge to basically assist her and give her an opportunity to clean herself up. And she did that. But some people don't understand that. Now, she also is, the idea of Lucifer came about from her falling or being embodied in mankind. And in no way is she or was she Lucifer, but the idea of what that is came from that falling, I guess. That's probably the best way to put it. Okay, so the bridge, the organizational structure of the bridge, their idea was, we have this momentum, let's take this chance. We have 20 years dispensation energy in which to work with. And El Morya got in I think it was probably 1950, 51. The bridge started in 52. They were preparing Geraldine Innocente to become a messenger in about 1948. Really, actually, 1944. El Morya appeared to Geraldine and asked her to do certain things on a daily basis, basically preparing her to become a messenger. So again, that's how difficult it is to become an accredited messenger for the masters. Okay, so that's how serious they take it. So anyways, it's 1952. The bridge is being set up. I have a sheet that I put together that I'll send you. I'm typing it out in Word right now. And it has all the organizational structure of the members, the executive order council, the press, and it also has the inner court, and it has a lot of the people who were involved with the bridge found out who their twin rays were. And here's a cute little story. In Valentine's Day, they met probably in Philadelphia. I don't know where it was. And on Valentine's Day, I think probably 53 or 54, I'll have to check on that, but it was February 14th. They meet, and they are all told that they're going to be given something. So some of them are given Valentine's Day cards from their ascended twin, who some of them knew, but most of them did not. So they found out who their twin was when they opened the card. And I know Alice got one from Dwa Kul, and I've seen that. I gave, when Bob, who was also involved with Alice at the end of her life, he decided to move to Florida, and it was felt like he's the one that Alice wanted to keep the work going on. So he took a lot of the material. It was set up to move the sanctuary down to Florida. But I've seen that card. But it's a cute little story of how they found out. It was also the bridge. One of the main things is that they started the idea of the transmission of the flame. The masters felt like with its advanced students, the idea was they would work hand in hand with the students right then and there. There was no lag. Things were happening on the inner as they were decreeing for it on the outer, or visualizing it on the outer. And that had never been done before. So the whole transition of the flame thing was new. And that's what really the Philadelphia group, when they started that, especially the Philadelphia group, but there were people all over the world doing it in the bridge, small groups. But that's what really accelerated giving back good constructive energy that the masters could use when that started. But I'll send you this organizational structure. It's pretty cool to see because it's all organized like a company. So it was pretty cool to see that. At the end of the bridge, this is something that a lot of people don't quite understand because not a lot of people have talked about it. In 1958, there were a number of individuals that really ran the bridge. It was Geraldine, Francis A.D.K, and I want to say Mary Minetta. But in 1958, there was a lot of tension. Things were happening on a personal level to people because they hadn't kept up with their personal decrees. So what happens is when you get into this work and life understands that you know certain things and are knowledgeable about certain things and certain tools that you can use to clean yourself up and transmute misqualified energy, life will throw more energy at you, right? Giving you an opportunity to clean up faster. And you have to be able to handle that on a personal level. So that in 1958 started to kind of come out that a lot of personal things were happening to people. And there was a lot of tension and stress. And not a lot of people on the bridge, Alice didn't really talk too much about this because she didn't want to get rumors out and talk about discord and, you know, all that personal stuff. But things like that happen, and they did happen, and she felt the force field that held the bridge together was broken in like mid to late 58. And so she left. There were a number of people that had just kind of had it. It was kind of built up. There were things were changing. The energy was changing. You could see it in certain information from the masters was kind of questionable about certain things. And so Alice and some other people had left. Mrs. A.D.K started the thing, I forget what it's called, but she started her own thing, and then eventually anyways, he kind of came across with Mrs. A.D.K. Alice had already written pretty much the Law of Life books before she left the bridge, kind of creating, again, a basic fundamentals that included the I am activity idea with the Bridge to Freedom activity, and she created the Law of Life books. I will have to say one more thing about the bridge. The masters knew that this window was going to be open only for so long. So they gave the students way too much information in a way. They felt like this is our moment with advanced students in this window with this messenger. So they gave all this extra information, a lot more than what the I am activity had. They gave the correct color of the rays. They gave all the ascended masters who wanted to get known what their names were, what the temples were, all that stuff they threw at the students quickly to get all this information out as much as they could. Way too much information than really what we need to make the ascension, right? So kind of keep that in mind. But anyways, 1958 happened. There was the force field. Alice believed the force field broke up because of the personal stress on individuals leading the bridge. And so she left, and she just kind of went all over the place. She was even in checking out like UFO groups just because she didn't know where to land. And she just thought, you know, I'll figure this out, but let me see what I'm doing. So she printed the Law of Life books in 59 and 60, Law of Life 1 and I believe 59, and Law of Life 2 and 60. So if we can go to the next slide. So miscellaneous during the bridge. Again, the Valentine's Day card thing. That's when she received one from Joel Kuhl. This is interesting. The bridge members, a lot of them had these famous embodiments for mankind. They were known embodiments, but they were advanced students, just like the masters. So they were advanced students, and a lot of them had embodiments where they did a lot of good. There were a lot of constructive things going on. So I forget, somebody was Lincoln and all these different things. Alice, some of her embodiments were, she was General Rochambeau during the Revolutionary War, the French general who really came up with the idea of how to beat the British. It was his plan, his war plan, his battle plan that helped assist America to defeat the British. She was also, at some point, she was part of the Oregon Trail, Lewis and Clark. The bridge students at one time, they were driving around and there was some kind of Oregon Trail thing happening, and they laughed and they made a joke and they said, Alice, you should go down there and tell them how it really was. And I never knew if she was Lewis or Clark or Sacagawea, but she was somebody involved in the Oregon Trail. That was one of her embodiments. The other cute embodiment was, if you read her Jesus and Mary book, there is part when Jesus is 4 years old and he goes to the temple to have initiations, right? To start his initiations. And there's a person from the temple who comes out and leads him in, grabs his hand from his mother and leads him into the temple every day, or, whatever. And that was Alice. So Alice was the person at I believe probably the Ascension Temple, that would lead him in, and then he would have his initiations and being taught and all of that inside the temple. And I think she would probably do that every day. So that's a cute little embodiment of hers. And most people don't understand that the bridge, the dispensations that were given during the bridge, because of all the bridge students did, the idea of gaining your ascension on the inner and not having to gain it on the outer. Before the occult law was lifted, you had to gain your ascension on the outer. And you also had to clean yourself up 100% to gain your ascension, which now is unheard of. So there were two big dispensations. One was you could gain your ascension on the inner and pass on and not gain your ascension, but you were able to do inner work to gain your ascension and gain your ascension on the inner after you made your transition. And then the other big one was you didn't have to, clean yourself 100%. You had to clean yourself up constructively to 51% constructive. So that was huge. And that some people don't understand. Those two things changed the idea of the ascension and really allowed thousands and thousands and thousands of people to gain their ascension. So very interesting. And then also the bridge members, the advanced bridge members, any family member, I think it's back to 2 or 3 lifetimes, were able to gain assistance on the inner to get their ascension on the inner. Even though they weren't qualified to do that, all the work that the bridge members did gave their members of their families down to like 2 or 3 generations the idea of assistance on the inner. So that is a lot. So go ahead, if you could change the slide. Okay, so Alice, again, wrote the Law of Light books really before the bridge had ended, knowing that she wanted to, and she was going to actually, I think, give this to the bridge, and I think they opted not to publish it, I believe, from what I remember, sorry. And so she left the bridge, got out the Law of Light Book of One, kind of started up and got the word going about Law of Light books, started classes slowly, and kept, decreeing and all of that. Law of Light books are basically the basic fundamentals, like she wrote for the I Am Activity, but also included the bridge material too. So it's just a good idea of what this activity is about, what this information is about. She, during this time, would use all types of paper. She would fold old envelopes up and flatten them out, right? And then write on them or type on them. And there was a book that she got out, and I don't know which book it was, if it was Jesus and Mary, or it was probably one of the smaller books. And she would send these old envelopes with written text on them in order, and the printer would print them out, type them out and print them out, and send them back to Alice. So she would not waste anything. It was crazy. And I have a couple examples of notes that she sent me, just to kind of show you the cute little the notes that I would get. The songbook was very interesting because she has a songbook. And I think the last time I decreed with you on that Tuesday, we sang a couple of her songs, if I'm not mistaken. And I asked her, I said, look, what do you know about music? I know you have a songbook. And she said, well, she had this xylophone that's in a picture, the last picture that I have on this presentation. And she would mess around on the xylophone, and she knew she'd write the lyrics and then change them a little bit to go with songs that most people knew. And then she had somebody who would annotate the music on paper, and then she printed the songbook. But she wasn't a musician, but she made it work because she had to, because that's what was needed, because songs are important during the group activity. Okay, so if you could change the slide. Okay, so Alice was very quiet. I remember the first time I ever met her in probably 86. I went out to a workshop of hers for 4 or 5 days, and I walk in the room and she's sitting there quiet, and she's sitting, but you can tell she's meditating, or something's going on the inner. And there's this gentleman there that I thought was her right-hand man that was speaking and talking and speaking and talking. And I could see Alice was not saying a word. And I got the idea that what Alice did was she would meet somebody at a class for the first time, or the class was about to start this thing. And she would try to get what the student needed at that time. And so you would hear her talk, and then all of a sudden go into something, and somebody's ears would perk up, and you could tell that they were like, oh, that's kind of what I needed to hear. And she wouldn't tell you that. She was very quiet about it, but that's how she kind of worked. And she wouldn't really say too much unless she was asked a question. And then that was the open door to say something. The master said to know, to do, to know, to dare, to do, and be silent. That was her motto. And she would only kind of say things if the door was open to answer that question. So she was very, very good about that. She was also really good at discernment. There are all these people that want to be the big shots and want to say all this stuff that the master said and are doing and all this stuff. And you have to discern between what is truth and what's not. And sometimes it's very, very, very subtle and intuitive, and you really have to decipher, what is probably from the ascended realm and what's not. And she was very good at getting me to understand that. So that was probably one of the most important things I ever learned from her. She was a great decreer, of course, but she she made her decree book. If excuse me, if you look at her decree book, you don't want to be sing-songy, but there's a certain snappiness that comes. And if your decrees are short and rhythmic, you can get up to that certain level of vibration to keep them where they should be. Okay. And sometimes you lose it because a decree, you'll have a lot of masters that you're calling to, or almost like you're reading a paragraph. And it's really hard to keep together when you're reading a paragraph or a couple paragraphs. And it's not that it's wrong, it's just, it's good to have a lot of the short, snappy ones to keep the vibration higher, because you're making the call from here, and the call has to be made from here into the higher realms in order for them to be allowed to do things. And those snappy, short decrees will do that. So Alice made her transition in 1994. We were there in the house, and we knew she was going to make her transition pretty soon. And I know right when she made her transition, we went to the decree room and instantly decreed for her transition and for assistance for her to be made while she was making this transition. So she taught us well. We went right to work. So if you can go to the next slide. So this is the original chart of the law of life. And she had somebody make this probably in Oklahoma. She originally moved to Oklahoma and had a sanctuary there for years before she moved to Colorado when I met her. And this was the original chart. She never liked it, but this is the one that was created, and she kind of went with it for a while. And then if you go to the next slide, this is a picture of Alice probably in the 80s. And we went to, in Colorado, we took a drive, and we had a number of cars from students during a class. And we took a drive, we stopped along a river, and we decreed kind of in nature. And somebody snapped this picture, I believe. I think that's when this was. The dress she's wearing, she would get dresses from students, or she had them from the 30s and 40s or 50s. And she only had a few dresses, but she would dress up. We would go to the grocery store, and she would spend about $20, and she ate nothing, but she had these cute little dresses and hats on that she would wear. And she'd get in my car, and we would drive into Pueblo, Colorado, and go to the grocery store. But she got them. She didn't pay for really anything. And she had these dresses, and they were all the same. She had so many, not a lot, but she made it work. But the masters, she wasn't eating for a while. She was kind of losing connection with the earth, being grounded. And the masters explained to her that, look, you have to start eating. You have to eat more to keep grounded, because you need to do things that are more grounded here on earth. Can you go to the next slide? So this is the newer chart that she made. Again, in the bridge, the idea of all the colors of the rays came out. They didn't know that in the I Am activity. They guessed, but they didn't know. And all of that. So this is the updated chart that the Law of Life still uses. So go to the next slide. This is in the front of the decree book. I just wanted to point this out. This was from a personal letter to Alice from Saint Germain on April 17th, 1954. And at the end of the letter, it said, just remember, Alice, there are some who serve in glory. There are some who serve in silence, but before the heart of heaven, service well done is one of our cherished possessions. God bless you. So that was a personal letter that Alice received from Saint Germain. And at the end of it, he put this, and she put this in the beginning of her decree book, just saying it was to a student. Okay, go to the next slide. This is what her house looked like. She had 40 acres out in Colorado in the high desert in southern Colorado, southeastern Colorado. And this is what her house looked like. It was, had a blue metal roof, and it was just kind of out in the open and just kind of plopped down there. A student, I believe, from Oklahoma, who was a contractor, made it. And she paid him to basically make the house. So he was up here for months and months putting this house together for her. Okay, next slide. This is one of the little letters that I would get from like, 86 on. And she had this little typewriter that she would type, but she would just, again, on the back of this was something else on it. And she would use just whatever was free to type out a letter and then send it to me, in an envelope or maybe she had other things she was sending to me. At this time, I was printing master's pictures for her in Columbus. I'm a filmmaker, a photographer, and I knew how to print, so I was printing all the master's photos for her. But she would come across things and think of me, and I was thinking about coming out, so I was just about ready to move out. But this is just an example, excuse me, of the cute little letters I would get from her. Okay, next slide. And this is me. This is in my 30s. It's amazing to see. And that's Alice sitting down, I think probably at a class. There were probably other students in the room that took the picture. But her big decree class was on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock. And we would decree. And then she and I would decree every day. I was working in the small town there. And I would run down after I worked and stay there, for hours. And we would decree every night. And it was amazing to be next to Alice decreeing. I know, I can tell one story where we were getting projections, and projections are things that hit your solar plexus and you kind of feel them, like your stomach twist a little bit. And so we both felt it, and we don't know where it was coming from, but we both felt it. So we stood up, we did the violet flame and bombs of blue lightning and cosmic circle and sword of blue flame and all of that. And the cool thing is, I remember that so vividly because the vibration raised, you could feel the energy and the vibration raised quickly. And it's one of those moments that I'll never forget. And it happened, many times, but this was much more intense than any other time. And it was just Alice and I. We got to run a business, and we called on the law, and we used the blue flame and the violet flame and took care of business like it should be, But I just remember that moment. So that is the end of my talk. If anybody has any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. I have probably a lot more stories I could go into.
It's marvelous, Scott. Thanks so much. So I'm sure
Yes.
people have got something to ask him. That was just absolutely wonderful. Bless you.
Thank you.
Has anybody got any questions?
No, I don't really have any questions. You did a great job of covering the material. Thanks, Scott.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Louise
Well,
is raising her hand.
Hello, hi Scott, nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, hold on, where am I? Can't find myself. Never mind. I particularly enjoyed the thing that you said about the decreeing, where if it's fast, it's raising the vibration. So I didn't know that. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, she was just a stickler. She's such a stickler, and I was kind of her right-hand man. Like I was a sponge, kind of like Alice was in the I'm activity, where I took it all in, right? And I really learned how to decree because she, showed us, and she wouldn't stop a decree session but she would, every time you would decree with her, she would look for certain things. And you could feel it. Again, when you're decreeing correctly, you can feel the vibration. There's something that happens, you know, and again, there are other decrees where people have, maybe you're calling to a lot of masters, or there's a paragraph such. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's those short, snappy decrees that are rhythmic. You don't want to, there's a fine line between singing them and decreeing them. And you have to find that line.
So is it very important to try and visualize at the same time as
Yes.
saying the words?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then sometimes you don't even know maybe what to visualize, and just do your best. You can visualize the world being surrounded with, violet flame, or you can, if you don't have a picture in your mind, picture your presence.
Feel it.
And you'll feel the vibration once that decreeing happens. I know the most that we ever decreed with were, we did it with 40 people in a house in Columbus when Alice visited in the late 80s. And that was amazing because we were all kind of advanced, and she was leading us. And again, Alice you just got into decreeing. She would give talks, and she'd talk about, the chart like Mr. Ballard did, but she had her own way of doing it. But then she'd get people into decreeing, whether they knew how to decree or not. She got them into decreeing, and then they would, take a break, and she'd go more into questions and answers, and then go back to decreeing or singing, or, she got you involved right away. But she was so good at the structure of the decreeing and how to do it properly to keep that snappiness up.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Scott. I would like to ask you something about the fundamentals. What's the final conclusion about the fundamentals? When you go through them, is it true that you receive a radiation from the mighty divine great director?
I never.
Do you have to go through twice a year? Well, what's the truth about that? Because I am confused with that subject matter. Please.
Can you say that question one more time?
Yes, the audio is not very good. So I would like to know what's the final conclusion about the fundamentals. One thing is that, do you have to go through them twice a year? And the other thing is that I've heard that when you go through them twice a year, you receive a special radiation from the mighty great divine director.
I'll give you my personal take and what Alice kind of told me about it, okay?
Okay.
So Alice pretty much wrote the fundamentals, right? And again, they were needed because these people were coming into the original I Am activity, right, with not a lot of knowledge or a good base of understanding. So they had some questions about certain basic ideas when it came to this new teaching. So they wrote the fundamentals, and they had classes for beginning students that were just introduced to the material in the original I Am activity, okay? This is before the card-carrying membership idea, which was good, right? So they had this fundamental class that people could take if they chose to take it. You did not have to take it, okay? You had free will not to do it, but this was available to you to get a better understanding. Then they had a meeting after Mr. Ballard made his transition, maybe in, I don't know when this happened. My guess is 43, 44, 45, 1945, something like that. And they had a meeting, and in that meeting, it was decided, not that Alice did not want this, but it was decided by Mrs. Ballard that, and I forget, Alice knew the person that brought this up, and Mrs. Ballard went with it. But it was decided that, hey, let's have everybody take the fundamentals twice a year. And now here's the most important part. demand that they do it to be in the I am activity. Okay? So it's the demanding and not having free will or choice to do it that changed. It also, they created this card that you had to be a card-carrying member to walk into a sanctuary and to be a member of the I am activity. And to get that card, you had to do the fundamentals and keep up with that card. You had to do the fundamentals twice a year. Okay? What happens is it closes off people from being introduced to this work. Okay, it becomes basically kind of a secretive society. And then what happened even more was, so that the fundamentals were good, but then people were not given a choice to do them. So what Alice thought was, look, why should somebody do it that has already taken this class? What are they going to learn from it that they don't already know pretty much? And you're wasting time if these people are coming to meet in the sanctuary. Shouldn't they be decreeing rather than having to take this class over and over again? That was one big point, but it's the card carrying part that closed off the activity to the rest of mankind, really. And that's not what the masters wanted. Whether you have a radiation from a master doing this or not, who's to say? I do know that once the card carrying idea came about and the books became they did not work on getting the books out in different languages and getting them distributed so anybody who possibly wanted them could get to them and see them and become aware of them. And that's when changes happen in the original I am activity after Mr. Ballard made his transition. This was in the 1940s.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I will say this, that I'm not putting down in any way the I am activity. I went to a sanctuary and I had a friend who was a member of the sanctuary and I was able to go in, but she said, look, don't bring up the Law of Life books. Do not bring up the Bridge to Freedom, right? You can talk about the green books, but don't talk about anything else, right? And I said, okay, I promised that I wouldn't. And I walked into the sanctuary in Columbus, Ohio. And it was amazing. You could feel the radiation. And then they took me up to a room. I was not allowed to go in the sanctuary, of course. I understood that. But they took me up to a room and they had some of Mrs. Ballard's clothes. And they had this pink sweater, some different things around this room. And you could feel the radiation. So in no way am I dismissing the I am. I'm just saying that they made certain decisions that did not go along with what the masters wanted. But the decreeing, don't get me wrong, when people decree, no matter what other things happen, they're decreeing. And great things are happening because of that.
Can I add something here, Scott?
Mm.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
in the bulletin books, it clearly says that the I am activity came in on the blue ray, and the Bridge to Freedom came in on the pink ray. So and the Theosophy came in on the golden yellow ray. So in order for the balance, it was important. The Bridge to Freedom came in on a different ray, and brought in the feeling of love. And we know, so it was a different. Different aspect of the law already brought in there. So and the Mahachahan said, in order for the real kind of victory, the Bridge to Freedom had to come in. That was why the I am activity wasn't completely successful.
Yes. And that I totally agree with that. I agree. And again, the accreditation of a messenger is so difficult, and there's so many different aspects, both inner and outer, that go along with it, that it doesn't happen all the time, you know. So I just want people to know that, you know, you want to kind of keep that in mind. And I'm not saying there aren't going to be new messengers. I'm just saying that they go through a process both on the inner and the outer to become that. And it's very challenging, and it doesn't happen all the time.
You know, it's been a marvelous talk, really valuable. Thank you so much, Scott.
Yes, yes. I will send you that organizational structure of the bridge when I type it out.
Alicia?
I just have
Oh,
Hi,
yes,
Scott. I just have a question about the transition. You didn't mention a lot about that, but what was that experience for you like?
Well, you know, I was taught by what's that?
You know why I asked this question? Because you know what, throughout the books you read them, and it's just nice to sort of have a personal sort of perspective from someone that sort of experienced this while it happened. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah. You know, before Alice made her transition, she started to see a lot of things in the etheric realm. You know, everything has an etheric stamp on it, where things, let's say if you're in a field and all the trees were cut down at some point, there's a record of that field having trees, right? And so she started to see things like that when she was getting ready to make her transition. She'd be looking out the window or something, and we would be talking, and she'd saying, "Hey, do you see that?" And I was like, "What?" And she'd say, "Oh no, that's in the etheric." And so she started to see a lot of that. When she actually made her transition, she was in her study, and we propped her up in this chair, and we knew that she'd be making her transition in a couple days, that day or night, or it was coming up. So we had gone to the front room to talk about some things. This is Bob and I, and another student, Donna, and we came back. She was by herself when she made her transition, and you know, we kind of knew instantly. We got the feeling, you know, that had happened. So we got a feeling in the front room that something had happened. I remember we stopped talking, we stood up, we looked at each other, and we went into the study, and she had just passed, right? And we, without even thinking, first of all, you know, there wasn't a big change. I mean, she was gone, but we were more focused on grabbing the decree books, going in the decree room, and decreeing than anything else. And the reason is, and I'm so happy with this, is that that's what Alice would have wanted. So that's what we did. I mean, we would have done it anyways, but that's, you know, looking back. But there really wasn't, you know, that big of a change that I remember in the study. I mean, it was a peaceful moment, but she was by herself when she made the transition.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you one more question?
Oh, sure.
Yes. did she ever talk to you something about Mr. Charles Sindelar?
Yes, you know, Charles Sindelar was very close to the Ballards, and he's the one, besides A.D.K, who was the artist of the group. And she didn't say too much about him, but she knew that he and Mr. Ballard were very close. They were very tied to the hip. That, you know, and he was very involved, but it was also the fact that Mr. Ballard and Mr. Sindelar were very good friends. So there was a friendly kind of banter back and forth between the two. The one thing that she said, Mr. Sindelar, I believe, lived in Los Angeles, or just outside Los Angeles. And the cute little story she said about Mr. Sindelar, he had a garden, and they went to the garden, and they were checking out the garden, and he pulled up this plant, and he said, I think this is right. What is this? And they found out that it was a pot plant, a marijuana plant. And I think they got rid of it, but that's a cute little story that she would tell about Mr. Ballard and Mr. Sindelar. But she didn't say much about Mr. Sindelar. You know, the I Am activity, she was so much more involved in the bridge than she was in the I Am. I mean, she was there for everything in the I Am, but she was behind the scene. And in the bridge, even though she was behind the scenes, she was one of the main people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, Louise here. Do you give talks yourself where you are in Portland?
I do not. I used to. I had to distance myself a little bit from the work, not personally, not my personal decreeing, not all of that, but there was a time there when I moved to Portland and I had to back away because, you know, I stood on the coattails of Alice, right? And it was just kind of a natural thing to do. Here's this person that was my mentor that I was involved with from really 1986 to 1994 very heavily, who influenced my life so greatly. And then when she made her transition, we were kind of, you know, what do we do? You know, what do we do now? And when Bob decided to move the sanctuary, I thought it was probably the appropriate thing because Alice wanted him to kind of lead things. And I was the sponge, but Bob was kind of the leader. But he didn't really take in a lot of information that Alice, it was different. I was the sponge. And so I had to kind of move away from it to make it my own. It's hard to describe, but I was too close to it. And I felt like once she made her transition, I had to find my own path. I had to, you know, step each step with my own feet. And it took me a while to kind of get that and understand that and find my own path. I never left the I Am. I never left the work. I you know, it is what it is. It's always with me. And all this knowledge that I gained from her and experience that I gained from her will always be with me. But I had to really step away. So I used to give talks, and then I just don't. I'm happy to do this at any time. It's something that I start talking, as you can tell, I start talking about it, and it is me. It's part of me. It will always be part of me. But the idea of leading something, just like Alice, I didn't want to be the big shot. And part of it is that if you're the big shot, there's a lot more responsibility karmically that comes with that. And I always like to be kind of behind the scenes, doing what I can and not leading the whole group.
Okay, so can I ask you if you've got something in the pipeline with all the sponge work at the moment?
Well, I just, I haven't really written anything. I know that Victor, if you know Victor and Dennis from the Law of Life people in Orlando, they're doing a great job. We got all the books on Kindle and PDF, and I was involved with some of that. But they have a biography that she wrote that I've never seen. Again, when Alice kind of kept everything hidden personally, and she didn't want us to look at anything, and we adhered to that even after she made her transition, kind of. So I didn't find this autobiography that she wrote that Victor says that he has, and I'm going to let her tell her story if that's ever printed. But with me, I was trying to find a decree group, decree by myself, but I found people from here and there. I will say that your group in South Africa is very similar to the idea of how Alice decreed.
Okay.
And so I'd like to keep going with your group via Zoom because it feels natural to me. So, but I don't do anything. I don't, it's just, again, it's one of those things that I had this experience. It is with me. But I haven't really found, as far as getting a strong urge of what I should be doing. I just keep doing it, especially on a daily basis.
So you just go around and radiate it.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sure you want to go. Can I just say I found it interesting about the personal cleanup thing about 51% and all that. That's also an interesting idea.
Yeah, that came about in the bridge material. Yeah, that's where that information is. The idea about that dispensation coming about. Okay. And completely change the idea. If you take it to heart, if it changed the idea of what the ascension is and how to gain your ascension.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Scott.
Yes.
Thank you, Anthea.
Oh, pleasure. I didn't do anything. It's just really, really good. It's been absolutely marvelous. Thank you so much, Scott.
Yes. And let me know if you have any questions. I'll do my best to answer them. Some people have questions about how the bridge broke up or how the I am, changed or all of that. And, I try to keep it so it's not personal, and not rumor mill, and just try to keep the facts as I know them. But some people have questions about, because a lot of students don't understand how that happened and why that happened. So.